Join me on stage. Now we're going to talk about something that is fairly dear to my heart, in part because I just wrote a big piece about it for our Techonomy magazine, which I hope you'll all read. Some of the panelists are involved. It's the future of food, and the future of really the planet in many respects. The future of the human race is health. And we have three very different exponents of the future of food here. And I think maybe the easiest way to get started is just for you each to talk briefly about what it is you do. Although I know some parts of that are secret now for Drew. But Christina Agapakis from Ginkgo Bioworks, quickly just describe what Ginkgo Bioworks is, and when you think of the future of food, what is it that gets you excited?
Great. So we work at the intersection of design and biology. What we do is create custom organisms for different companies. We work with people like fashion companies, fragrance companies, cosmetic companies, food companies, thinking about how yeasts and fermentation can make ingredients and be part of their manufacturing and innovation process. So we think really broadly about biology, about chemistry. That's obviously very connected to food. So that's how I think about food, through the lens of yeast, microbes, and chemistry.
Yeah, the role of microbes in everything, yes, kind of thing. Yeah, but you're currently doing mostly fragrances and flavors, right?
Those are our first partners, and sort of a lot of our research right now is going to flavor, fragrance, yeah.
But it could go well beyond that.
Absolutely.
What's the wildest thing that it might go toward food-related?
Wildest? Well, so we're thinking actually a lot about, we talked about this a little bit backstage, what our extinct plants taste and smell like? So can you make a fragrance from a flower that nobody has ever smelled? That's something I'm thinking about now.
Great. So Caleb Harper with the Open Agriculture Initiative from the MIT Media Lab. What is the Open Agriculture Initiative? What is it that's moving your passion right now?
So she's creating designer organisms, and I'm creating designer climate. So, you know, biotic, abiotic stress, or the phenome, or the phenomena around the genes is actually a lot what we care about. If we're going to create a flavor, a color, a texture, nutrient density, we're going to do that by pushing a gene to express what we want. So I create little climate boxes, little and big ones. And in those boxes, as we grow things, we create data streams. When I take something out, I have a digital trace. I have a recipe. I can now take that recipe and actuate it again. Agriculture, in this respect, for the things that I produce, becomes 365 days the same, becomes predictable inputs and outputs, and becomes networked. Because I can actually send that climate recipe to another box across the world rather than sending food.
So it's basically making agriculture happen entirely in contained, automated, essentially, environments.
Right.
And then measuring it all the time and learning and continually iterating based on those measurements.
Yeah, I think of it like climate democracy, if that was a thing. If every country could have the climate that was best and we weren't chasing it, our Californian farmers weren't now Mexican farmers. The Middle East was not going into northern Africa. China did not buy up all of Brazil for its food. What if we anchored climate, right? And then what would we learn? Climate creates stress. Stress creates biochemicals. Biochemicals are the things that we want. So if we can start to push plants, which are factories. Plants are factories and sensors. So if we learn how to push the plants to produce the most nutrition, we eat less plants. We do that right where we're living. And we have, you know, a new tool. It doesn't replace agriculture. It's not like, oh, this is going to be what we all eat from all the time. But it's a strategic tool for the fact that people are now living together and will continue more living together into the future in giant cities.
So it has a lot to do with urbanization. So Drew, draw some of that together with your work. First, what is it that you do? You're not a food person per se.
No. So my background is in ecology. I got into ecology through artificial life and then got interested in real life. And my most recent job, before the one I just moved to at Google DeepMind, so for many years I was at Microsoft Research, and I had a group called the Computational Ecology and Environmental Science group there. And what we did for many years was tried to build predictive, accurate simulation models of different aspects of the Earth system. So whether that's forests, fisheries, often taking a very large-scale, long-term view, like the thawing of the permafrost under climate change over the next 50 years, but sometimes a much smaller-scale view, like novel models of the development and growth of individual plants and how the plants, a bit like Caleb said, actually, sense and make choices about how they allocate to leaves and roots and so on. And what we found was when we looked at all these global challenges, this is my interest in food really comes from that actually, which was that it would always point back to food because everything's connected. I'll just give you two examples. So one is that, let's say you're only interested in biodiversity in the Amazon rainforest, but the main driving force behind deforestation is land clearance for agriculture. And so when you're trying to predict that, you look at it and you say, well, that's going to reflect crop prices, which reflects population growth. And then you think, but it's not just, there's also climate change, which is being exacerbated by the tropical deforestation. Plants don't just respond to climate. Of course, the CO2 itself alters the way the plants grow and develop and their nutrition in ways that are very poorly understood. So everything would just point back to the food. And to give you one more example, which is much less, I think, intuitive, is that if you were to look at a chronic problem over the next 200 years, climate change tends to come to the top of the list. But if you look at an acute problem, the idea of a novel flu pandemic, another Spanish flu-like event, is one of the most worrying things that could happen to humanity. But the engine of new innovation in flu itself, where do new flu viruses come from? They come from when you get avian flu and human flu coexisting in pigs at the same time, and that's where you get the radical changes in the structure of flu that cause pandemics. And where does that come from? In Asia, where we've got ever-increasing densities of chickens and other poultry and pigs and people living in close proximity because of changes in diet that are making people eat more meat. So I hope you're getting the idea there that everything kind of loops back on this issue of food, and that implies to me that we really do need to be thinking of a next revolution in the way that we grow food, or maybe multiple revolutions, actually, for different things.
It's great to have someone up here who thinks so, holistically by policy. So that's really a great element in this discussion. And I also like that you used the phrase poorly understood, because to the degree that I have dug into food recently, it really has sunk in on me very deeply how little we really understand about what's really happening inside our bodies when we eat and how the food we eat is actually created. We have industrial processes that produce stuff that keep us going, and we do seem to be living longer lives, but we really don't know why when it comes to nutrition in almost any aspect. And I wanted to also just to underscore the scope of the challenge and the issue, read some data that I put in my article coming from McKinsey, our friends at McKinsey. Agriculture is a $5 trillion industry, representing 10% of global consumer spending, 40% of global employment, and 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, although methane from livestock is a big part of that. It's not all plant-related. I'm especially interested in plants, and that's what Caleb is mostly working on, although not only. But here's another one. As the global middle class burgeons, the world is going to have to produce 70% more calories than it does today, and at least 100% more total agricultural crops by 2050, calculates McKinsey. Okay, so I guess what I'm eager to sort of shift to is the vision, First of all, can we gain more understanding? How are we going to gain more understanding? And how are we going to use that understanding to produce those calories in a way that does not poison the planet? Because right now, from where we sit, given the methods we currently use, there doesn't seem to be a way. I mean, first of all, would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, I've said many times that, it's a fantastic thing that the thing called the Green Revolution happened. And I'd encourage everyone to read into the history of that, because it's an amazing story of how there was an original kind of agricultural revolution over a couple of hundred years in places like Britain and the US. And then it very rapidly spread in the 60s to Mexico and India and Brazil, for example, hugely increasing yields. And just before that, a lot of people were very worried about whether there was going to be mass starvation in those countries. And it's an incredible story of making that not happen. However, the way it really worked was all dependent on huge increases in inputs, in nitrogen, fertilizer, etc. And it also caused a major exodus because it used a lot less in the way of human capital, and a major rural exodus, etc. So it had these huge effects. And we need a similar magnitude again And yet we now know that we can't just throw more and more resources to produce more and more food because of the knock-on effects on climate, et cetera. So it's a kind of, so the Green Revolution was an amazing thing, and we need to pull off something again, but this time we've got to do it a very different way that we did it before.
Well, I think the question at the time was, how do we produce more, cheaper food?
Yeah.
And that was it, and the question has changed. And so the third revolution continues now in agriculture, right, which includes biotechnology. That is not part of a new revolution. That's squarely in the middle. The next revolution is about accounting. It's fully about an accounting machine that takes in the ecological, the nutrition consequences, all of that together to create a holistic picture. So an example I learned recently, partnering with a new corporate retailer, which is, how old do you think an apple is in the United States on average in a retailer? How old? Take a guess. And this is a global chain, I mean a national chain and global actually, but one apple.
I would guess 2 months.
2 months, 14 months.
Whoa.
Average age of an apple in a global retailer is 14 months because they hedge them. Like, why do we have apples in June? Like, we have apples in June because they've been in storage, they've been gassed, they've been held to stay, and we've created an amazing system for that. But you know what else happened? All the antioxidants, gone. All the nutritional benefit, mostly gone. What
Because
happens?
it just sort of leaks
because it's
away over
well,
time.
it's dying.
Yeah.
Right. The minute you take I'm sorry for the people that, like the minute you harvest a plant, the plant is dying. And so the longer time between when you harvest and when you eat, the less it is going to be good for you. So, like, of course, flash freezing, great option. Davis would say, UC Davis would say flash freezing is better than fresh, and they'd probably be right. But then flash eating may be better than flash freezing. So, that idea of that apple, I mean, we're basically feeding balls of sugar, little balls of sugar in our apples that say organic. Like, people think organic means something. It means nothing for nutrition. It's a marketing ploy. Like, that's going to come out square in food very soon, backing nutrition claims up against marketing.
Well, okay. So, I just was writing a few notes here. How big of a change could we make, though, Caleb? I mean, and you're really deep into this. You're working with some global companies like, Target is pretty global. I mean, Target is one of your backers, and they're really involved in this. And Lee Kum Kee, which is a Hong Kong-based food company. What is it that you think could happen with global food?
I think what will happen with global food will be that more of it will be point source produced and consumed. So, like, more of it, and it's not going to be all of your diet. And what the area of science that I represent always makes these overclaims that I hate, which is, we're going to disrupt farming, we're going to be the way that you produce all your food. No, definitely not. All right, conventional crops, corn, soy, wheat, and rice, produced at such a scale, it's a commodity. But that other percentage of your diet, depending on how you eat, about 30 to 40% of your diet could be produced urban or peri-urban and would be a lot better for you if it was. And so I think we're starting to see that now because, the problem with shipping from a nutritional standpoint, the problem from a pollution standpoint, the problem from a logistics standpoint, is starting to take its toll. And so it's a no-brainer that, like, as we're all condensing into cities, we're going to produce more of it there. The question is how many people are going to have access to it. So that's another part, or another reason why I'm all open source. This has to be open information. This has to be open tech platforms. Everyone wants transparency in food. Any food company right now that's building opacity in their offering to a consumer is going to die. Those brands are, the legacy brands are dying because of that.
Opacity, you mean?
Opacity. If they're not telling you exactly what's in it,
Yeah.
exactly how it was made, exactly how good it is for you, is it safe for my children to eat? If they eat your product, will they get diabetes in 8 years? Like, these questions are squarely on the forefront of the average consumer. So it's a shift. It's a shift to more food, less price, to better quality food, and wanting to know more about it. And our system isn't built to create information at this point.
Just if you would indulge me, I wanted to just briefly summarize the kinds of things that are happening in your area, which has got different names: indoor agriculture, vertical farms, city farms, plant factories. Those are different parts of the world call them different things. But these are basically indoor LED light illuminated, highly controlled environments that are growing chambers that range in size from a toaster to massive acre-sized fields. In fact, China is building the biggest ones based on my reporting. They call them, what do they call them? I forget what they call them. I'll have to look in my own article. But they're building the biggest. They're being very quiet about it, but they're doing a ton right now. And the idea is, as you were saying before, just so people connect all the dots, that you can take these recipes, going back to your earlier word, and apply them from the toaster size to the acre size, more or less entire, once you get the recipe. But the recipe can be very complicated, right? It involves CO2 concentration, color, intensity of light, temperature, nutrient mix, et cetera, and plenty of other variables.
Right. And that's just what we know.
Okay, yeah, and let's then get to Christina, because you get to the microbial piece, and that's the part we know the least about, right? And you know, like, what is it actually doing to our food, positive or negatively, that, you know, we grow things outdoors where animals are shitting all over the place, and which is a great thing, but I mean, that's nature, right? But it's changing the nature of what we eat. And what could we eventually learn, and how could it change the way our food functions?
Well, it's amazing. You said it's very complicated, right? And you listed like 4 variables. And I think when you're talking about soil, you're talking just like an incredible complexity. I think, you know, every gram of soil has many billions of cells of microbes living in it. And those microbes are many different species that are interacting with each other. They're talking to each other. They're talking to the plant. They're talking to insects. They're interacting with all of these different things, and they're impacting the plant itself and how it grows. So they're creating nutrients. They're making available for the plant to grow. They're helping the roots grow. They're providing fertilizer. They're providing phosphorus, iron, and they're also doing sort of like an internal warfare. So, you know, there are fungi that can kill plants, but there are bacteria that live on the roots that kill the fungi. And so like there's this really complicated system that's all working together. And so I think there's really fascinating research. I did a nice postdoc working on plant growth promoting microbes. But it's really difficult to think about how is it going to be incorporated at the scale at which agriculture is working right now. When you have the Green Revolution, you have a chemical sort of inputs to switch over to a more biological system and maintain the same kind of yield, I think is really challenging. And
do you suspect that as we go forward with sort of industrialized indoor agriculture, which is sort of what Caleb's all about, that may be more controllable and possibly purer in some ways, that the microbial piece will have to enter into it in order to get the quality and the reliability, which, by the way, is not something anybody's really dealing with much now in that arena?
So actually, it's interesting. I heard a talk recently by somebody who studies, he put like a box around corn plants and like counted how many organisms were in it. And like in an agricultural, like industrial agriculture sense, you know, there's a handful of organisms. But when we put the same box around a plant in the forest, there's thousands. And I think we're already in agriculture in soil seeing like a kind of purity, right? And a kind of stripping away of all that biological complexity already. So I think a lot of people who are thinking from a biological perspective, a systems perspective, are starting to say, well, how can we nurture a new kind of complexity without having to actually control all the variables, without having to sit there and say, well, okay, I want this microbe next to this microbe next to the root, but see how the system works together, and you can nurture that kind of environment. So I think when you're talking about controlling the variables in the environment, you're talking about creating an environment to nurture a plant, to help it grow. You're not controlling the plant, you're creating an environment that allows biology to happen.
Do you have any observations on that, Caleb, or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer that we're going to be soon moving into dosing things like bioactives, right? Like bacteria and microbes into the water. Water's alive too. Water's alive just like soil's alive. And water is actually a great medium for culturing things. You know, soil, yes, has all those things if it's good soil. If it's bad soil, it also has other things that go into plants that kill people, which is why China is racing into this, right? China is driven purely by fear. No one knows what's in the food. People are dying from it. Right. And you know, they have to have something different. It's not an option. It's not like, oh, you know, probably the biggest discrepancy right now is the world of people, and I think I represent both, but like one side that says we want better food and we want Mother Earth and we want, you know, bucolic landscapes. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. 7 billion people, 9 billion people living in cities, bucolic landscapes, get over it. Like, we have to know more about science. We have to invest in that. It has to be open. And any IP that gets in that way kills people down the road.
But going back to your recipe idea, if we do move towards massive controlled agriculture, that probably, I assume you're saying that we will have to enter a microbial element into that recipe that we don't really have any clue about right now in order to do it at the highest effectiveness.
I think a really good flag for me was the two newest centers at MIT that are super, super well funded. The Center for the Microbiome and the Center for Food and Water Security, right? That's Harvard, MGH, and MIT trying to figure out what's in here. Do you know the height of this technology, by the way, is fecal transplants. We take healthy feces from one individual and we put it in an unhealthy person and we try to populate that.
That's
So I think
fascinating, though, right?
Yeah, it's
like,
super
it
fascinating.
Works. It's like the most.
It works.
It's the
Yeah.
most effective
Yeah.
pharmaceutical thing ever, and it's just poop, right? I think that's. I mean, it's an amazing thing, and so that's why actually, like when we're talking about high tech and technology, is like poop is the best pharmaceutical we have to treat
but that's
like
primitive.
gastrointestinal diseases.
But it's primitive, right? I'm glad you brought up the
primitive.
microbiome because I was going to ask the biologist here, we know so little. It's suddenly a big area of tremendous excitement as we discovered at our Techonomy Bio Conference in March, where one of your colleagues was present. But, it's essentially terra incognita from a knowledge point of view. We just don't know what's going on in there, which means we don't really know the interaction of whatever it is, whether it's 14-month-old apples or a brand new, just picked lettuce leaf. So what are the chances, would you say, as a biologist, that we're really going to decipher that and then begin to decipher the intersection of what happens in there with how we produce stuff out here that we then put in here?
The chances are good that we're going to learn more. We're learning more every day, and it's really fascinating. We're like really great technology that's happening to sequence and understand the complexity of the gut, and really interesting stuff happening scientifically. I think from a kind of operational point of view and like what the lessons are eat more fiber, eat fruits and vegetables, and you're good to go, right? Like the precision-ness, I think, isn't as necessary. That's what you see when you're looking at the scale of like ecosystems. I don't know, actually, I'm curious what you think. Like to kind of push and nudge an ecosystem, you don't have to precisely control every single aspect of it, and in fact, you can't. And so what you're learning by looking at the microbiome is that, yeah, eat vegetables. that's kind of the result.
Eat lots of colors.
Eat colors, the kind of things that you knew all along. And now, yeah.
And we definitely have analogies to that in ecology more generally. So it's one of the mysteries, really, is why nature is so stable. Because when we model it mathematically, if you do that in any kind of reasonably naive way, you get extremely chaotic dynamics. But what you see out in nature, compared to what those models would predict, is a lot of stability. A forest kind of looks the same each year, roughly. You can monitor individual insects might come and go, but the total insect population itself is quite stable. So we know that there are these poorly understood, strongly regulating factors in natural ecosystems. And so I think that, compared to what you were saying, Caleb, I think, and this is something I think we all agree on when we're talking backstage about this, is that we need this huge plurality of approaches to food. And it's fantastic to see it on the agenda at a place like this, at a Silicon Valley kind of based conference. And so some of this precision control stuff I absolutely agree with, and I think the nutrition is going to come, we're going to use completely different approach, so I agree with all of that. On the other hand, we still do have this more kind of global macroeconomic problem of just producing enough calories to feed the number of people there are, and we can't build, yes, we could do that if we throw huge amounts of energy and capital in there, glass and electricity to run the LED lights and some chemical process that's producing high CO2 concentrations, but we can't do that because it'll wreck the climate. And so this new green revolution is going to come from as intimate as possible understanding of the ecological processes, and then working out how we can get the higher yields and the stability of the yields without increasing the inputs. And my own view as an ecologist, so partly we'll be relying on the inherent stability of nature, I think, to do that, and learning from the past. Actually, there is stuff to learn from the past, and when people go back to the whole backward moving thing, there is something to learn from that culture of organic agriculture. At the same time, I feel when we look at something like plant breeding, we barely got started on the kinds of ways that we could reprogram plants out in nature. A very simple example, which I mentioned last year, is that all of our staple crops are annual plants. So they put huge amounts of material into growing roots every year. They have to do that from scratch, and when they're small, they're very vulnerable because the roots aren't very deep yet. And then they grow a nice big plant. They then switch to filling the grains, and then they die at the end, and all that investment is wasted, and then they have to grow again, starting from scratch. And this comes from the fact that in nature, those plants that have evolved to allocate towards seeds, which is what we're after when we grow the staple crops, happen to have rapid life cycles as well. But if we could break that evolutionary link and have perennial plants that keep their root system year to year but allocate lots towards seeds, then that could in principle give us much more stable, higher yields with lower inputs, et cetera. So that's kind of one example. And the original green revolution, was smart. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't just about throwing nitrogen on the field. So the dwarf varieties was about realizing that you had to evolve shorter plants, because otherwise when you gave them the extra nitrogen, they toppled. And it was all very deliberate the first time round as well. It was clever, but it was clever in a way that enabled the plants to make use of the increased inputs made possible by.
I want to go to the audience, but I want to ask you one more thing, Drew, continuing on your theme here. This phrase natural, which is very commonly used, and people think they know what it means. What do you think of that word?
I don't worry too much about that, but I do think that we spoke about it before, that there's a definite misconception. We tend to view natural as whatever we experienced when we were kids or whatever we've read about that our grandparents did, right? Then for the vast majority of our history, human beings didn't have agriculture. We just roamed around. We were talking about this earlier. We ate what we could find in the natural environment. We would have had an incredibly diverse diet that varied day to day and week to week. Probably close to the kind of thing, Caleb, that I think you'd like to rediscover in the modern age, So that's, if there's natural, that's closer to natural, in a sense. And so I think that people often expect me as an ecologist to want us to look back and go back to being organic. And I kind of think that's not my instinct. I think if we're smart enough, we can use our understanding of nature to move forward as a species in the way we interact with food.
I just want to read a quote from the article from this guy, Dixon Despommier, who wrote the most influential book on vertical farming, and he's a professor emeritus of public health and microbiology at Columbia, and he said, farming is not natural, period. Farming is not natural. You have to destroy ecosystems in order to farm. And we can't afford that because that's our life support system. So we have to restore our life support system and have food. And then he's a big proponent of the kind of thing Caleb is all about. But he has a whole bunch of calculations about the amount of land that could be freed up if we were to do more vertical agriculture in cities, and then more forests would regrow where agriculture is currently happening, and we could absorb more carbon and possibly address climate change that way, which is of interest to you, I'm sure, and we could go down that path, but I'm sure that some of these things have intrigued people in the audience. Anybody have a comment or question? Okay, right there.
Thanks. I'm just curious.
And identify yourself.
Oh, I'm George John. For how many more years will traditional terrestrial farming even be, cost effective or viable? I mean, I think I just recently read the article in National Geographic that you might have been featured in, and it just makes so much sense. You control the spectrum, you control the air. Aeroponics delivers the right nutrients to the roots. It seems silly to stick seeds in the ground and drive over them a lot, So I'm just curious how much longer the traditional model even exists.
There was a really interesting comment that the founder of the Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte, made a couple days ago that shocked an audience, and he said, the value of arable land will continue to decline. And if you just think about that for a minute, that's totally counterintuitive. But the more, like it or not, the more food that we get from the Petri dish, the less valuable the arable land becomes. So as we start to go into advanced manufacturing of food in different ways, I think it will decline the necessity to have a good climate. And then on the flip side, how many climates and areas have we already polluted and ruined? How long is it going to take to get them back? When we think about Mars colonization, this is the technology that we're talking about. So as we start to need, the idea that we'd need Buckminster Fuller balls on Earth, as you get this is Biodome with a brain that sends information to another biodome.
Yeah, I would take a lot of convincing to think that. I mean, if I would imagine that we're going to have something that looks familiar in the sense of large amounts of plants growing out in a semi-natural environment, on the Earth's surface for a very, very long time to come. Because I think, if we could throw enough material inputs into a greenhouse, we could solve the food problem. But you've got to think those LEDs are being fed from an energy system somehow, right? We currently don't know how to produce enough energy to feed those LEDs without putting huge amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere or driving energy prices.
But I got to say, from vertical farming, I have zero concern about energy whatsoever. You know, we started by creating full spectrum lights with a lot of energy loss and a lot of heat loss, you know, high pressure sodium lamps, all that stuff. The Nobel Prize for the blue LED, right? This dropped my energy for producing that light spectrum to only the photosynthetically active radiation, which is between red and blue, by 10x. You know what they're doing now? Isolating the single wavelength that it takes at a certain time of a plant's development, which is another reduction of 10x. If you know, all of the indicators are that we're getting better photovoltaics, we're trending lower on...
Even you earlier in this discussion said there's still going to be fields of soybeans and wheat.
Yeah, I think there will be, but there won't be fields of soybeans and wheat in Qatar.
Right.
Right.
And there won't be in many other places.
But
So
I think, again, what
the
I'm
farmers will,
encouraging you to
travel.
think about is the fact that, you know, that there's more to material input than just the energy, right? So there's the construction cost of all of these things. It's extremely significant. So for a very long time, we're going to want to take advantage of the fact that we have free sunlight, that this Earth that we've managed to survive through for millions of years, various species of Homo, in the last 150 years, Homo sapiens, continues to give us rainfall, continues to give us soil ecosystems which naturally regulate and are stable. And we've been doing everything we can to push that system, and yet we're still here and we're still eating, right? So I think that we're going to, you know, my view would be that there'll be a plurality, and that we'll find that in different countries, like you said, for different crops, there'll be different solutions. And I'm sure there will be areas where we'll see actually mass conversion of agricultural lands back to something more natural. That's already happened this century, a lot more than people realize. 100 years ago, the eastern US was 25% forested. It's now 75% forested. So 50% of that entire area has gone from agriculture to, and no one's even noticed. And that will. So I agree with that. I think.
Yeah,
I think it will happen.
I hope I'm not coming off too maniacal. Like, I think that, you know, this is a tool. Like, I should preface with, I call what I'm working on food computing, and I do it for a reason, because I feel like I'm in the homebrew computer club, and it's just in 2015. Like, we're building platforms for other people to express their morals, their ethics, their financials, their nutrition desires, to know more about the world. You know, I learn things every day, like, did you know that if you release a certain kind of bug in a certain kind of field, tea leaves, you concentrate the chemicals that we all like about the flavor of tea leaves because the bugs are present, because the plants know. And the plants are trying to resist the bug eating them. So really smart tea leaf purveyors throw bugs on fields at certain times and then harvest. You know, I do some drought testing. I take water away from certain types of lettuce. It becomes sweeter. Nobody knows this. It's winemaking for food. So I think I'm building computers. You all explore. Come to the thing. You get educated in that way, and you get to make the decision of the way that we go forward. It won't be top down. That I'm absolutely.
Well, and just on that point, you're putting these food computers in classrooms in order to let students, 7th and 11th grade students in the Boston area, are currently in some classrooms experimenting with these recipes.
They're currently emailing climates in Boston. That is a fact.
That's a pretty cool thing.
So
Who else has
I wanted to add something because Nicholas Negroponte also said that bio is the new digital, and so I think that's what when we're talking about plants and ecosystems and yeast and microorganisms, that's biology. That's the new powerful substrate for thinking about everything, thinking through technology. So I don't think that we have to. I don't think that biology is going to become obsolete. Biology that you put a seed on the ground and it grows, like we're going to learn more about it. We're going to learn really interesting things from the computers, from ecosystem models, and that's going to help us do all sorts of things.
As we're creating these climates, I think we might be climate prospecting. Like, I'll put things in the box, understand what they are, and we might say, oh my gosh, we should have always been creating pea protein in Ghana, because the microclimate in Ghana is actually amazing for expressing this very high value protein. These are things we never did. We were like, what's the easiest thing to do to get the most amount of yield? And then we narrowed it down to a few crops. We're going to explode. The germplasm that we're going to be able to play with from ancient, rare seeds, from the Nordic Seed Bank, from Seed Savers Exchange, from all these organizations, it's going to be amazing.
So, okay, let's get a bunch of voices on the. Okay, here, and then first there, then here, then here.
Thanks. This is Mark with Recode. My question is for Drew. So far, DeepMind has put out 2 papers on impressively beating an Atari video game. That's basically it. So why would they hire an ecologist? Can you talk to me about what deep learning you'll be doing there?
He can't talk about that.
I know,
sure, again.
I know, crazy, right?
No, he really can't. Actually, he's not allowed to even say his job title. That's a fact, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
So you can't answer why they hired you.
No.
We can be led to speculate.
I'm naturally a very transparent person, but yeah, I should say I've only been there for 4 days, so obviously I haven't even had a chance to.
He hasn't learned his job title yet either.
So I haven't had a chance to talk about exactly how we should talk about these things publicly and so on. So I appreciate the interest, and I'm very excited to be at DeepMind. I think it's an incredibly exciting thing, but I'm sorry.
Okay, here and then up here.
Hi, Erica Kochi.
From UNICEF.
From UNICEF. Great panel, first of all. I have a question on how we make this, what you guys are all talking about, a reality at scale and at low cost, especially for countries that, don't have sort of aren't the economic superpowers that, Asia, whether it's China or the US are. How do we do it at low cost and at scale?
Actually, I'm kind of glad that one came up because there is a kind of revolution going on at the moment, actually, in agriculture. And I think the ones we've been talking about, in a sense, I think you could look at this as perhaps the tail end of the second revolution. We were talking about this earlier, Caleb, and we've really been talking about the beginning of the third, the next phase. But right now, there's a huge amount that we could do in just improving conventional agriculture. And in places like sub-Saharan Africa, which never really got the benefits of the Green Revolution, that could be as simple as just being able to spread the best practice in husbandry as we understand it now, which itself could be facilitated by as simple things as just internet access and so on. So it's really important to not forget that. And the other part of that revolution that's happening is in precision agriculture. So this is the whole world of satellite data, drones, big data, machine learning, and this is a huge thing that's happening at the moment. I don't know if you've heard about Climate Corp, for example, a couple of ex-Google people, trying to predict the weather and other aspects of farms better, and next thing they're bought by Monsanto for $1 billion, who then say they think they're worth $20 billion, and so on. And so, John Deere is making enormous inroads into gathering data from the tractors together, and so on. So we're going to see this really interesting kind of near-term process where we're going to see improvements in agriculture in some areas that really haven't had the benefits. And I think that's
let me throw a curveball to the question because that's fun. I recently got the privilege of speaking with Kofi Annan about how what I would do would affect Africa, and I would have no idea when I first started talking to him. And he said, "Did you know that 80% of our population is under 18? And did you know 50%? Sorry. And did you know that 80% of that 50% doesn't want to be a farmer?" And that they've seen their families suffer, die. We've seen more Indian farmer suicides this year than the last, I think it was like previous 10. So what it does also is provide an opportunity for a youth to be involved in something that's related to technology and brings them back into agriculture. What does it mean for Africa if the land will never condense, aggregate like we have in the United States? It's single, small shareholder farms. When they all move into the city, why do we only talk about smallholder farmers in the rural setting? Why don't we talk about Lagos in developing nations? So
my question is, how do you do that in Lagos? So all the pictures I've seen of these vertical farming is like that looks like Denmark, like Copenhagen. That does not look like Lagos to me. So how do you?
Well, if Nigeria got rid of all the corruption, they could afford.
I'll tell you exactly how. You open source it. Right now, it's protected behind IP walls. John Deere, is a perfect example of everything that's John Deere is John Deere, all the way back down to the data. So like that model is changing. In my field right now, if you can't raise money from a venture capitalist unless you show them a patent portfolio. And you know what? They're getting really bad investments because those patents are really, really immature. So you open source these systems. You create them more on a framework like data centers, where it's like these are baselines. This is what you add. If you're trying to do better, here's a component. You create an ecosystem. Right now, it's one-off solutions. Like before Ford, and all the cars were super weird and went too fast or too slow or killed people or had a sail attached, or it's that moment before it's system. It's not a system yet. So when it becomes a system, it gets implemented in places like that.
Okay, we're really pretty much out of time, but did you still want to say something? Yeah. If it's a comment, I would appreciate it. Better than a question.
PV Khan in 24/7. I'm just curious about the role of meat in food. I mean, you talked about plants and vegetables.
Oh yeah,
What's
we
the
should have
future of
talked
meat?
about that, but yeah. That's really kind of up your alley, or, well, I mean, obviously it's a problem, but go ahead.
Well, I think, another thing we weren't able to touch on is that it seems pretty clear to me that you won't solve these food problems, or actually put it more optimistically, we won't take advantage of the many exciting opportunities in food in the future just by producing more or just by producing different food. We also have to think about people's diet choices, and we have to think about the wastage in the system. And so, and at the moment, it looks pretty clear that certainly in the near term, we'd like to see a reduction in meat consumption per head. because I'm sure you all know that meat takes a lot more resources and other things, and it's easy to be dismissive of that, to think, oh, behavior change never really happens, or is too slow. But I've been thinking about this recently. Think about the smoking ban. Now we can hardly remember that it would have been perfectly normal for people in this room to be smoking just not that long ago, right? So behavior can actually change quite quickly, and so there's a whole question there in a way about how this techonomy. You talk very broadly about technology, and I don't know, is there an equivalent of Uber or Airbnb to try and reduce food loss after purchase? About in the West, half of what we buy is wasted after purchase. Completely ridiculous, right? And is there some way to sort of educate young people about their diets and about their nutritional choices so that they're not just eating loads of food and getting unhealthy?
And for anyone who wasn't here yesterday, we did have Andres Forgax of Modern Meadow, which is really working to grow meat, and he believes it can be done over time, and often Andres and Caleb appear together, and the only reason he's not up here is because they've been together on so many panels recently. I did not want to do another panel with Andres.
Me, Andres, and
Caleb
Josh
together.
Tetrick. Yeah.
They're very good friends. Anyway, got to wrap. This is great. Plenty more to discuss. We will have more food panels here, and I hope at other similar events. So thank you, all three of you.